December 18th, 1996. Children's Hope Foundation Orphanage, Budapest, Hungary. Outside, snow fell in gentle swirls, coating the city in a pristine white blanket that softened its edges and muffled its sounds. Inside the century-old building, warmth battled against drafty windows and aging radiators. Christmas decorations hung from the walls. Paper snowflakes cut by small hands, strings of popcorn garlands, and a modest tree adorned with handmade ornaments in the common room. The children had been restless all morning, an electric current of anticipation running through the orphanage. The staff had tried to maintain some semblance of routine, but it was a losing battle. Today was special. Today, Michael Jackson was coming. His History World Tour had brought him to Budapest, and unlike most visiting celebrities who sent signed merchandise or financial donations, Michael had requested to visit in person. No cameras, no publicity team. Just Michael wanted to spend time with children who had no families during the holiday season. At precisely 2 o'clock, a black sedan with tinted windows pulled up to the entrance. The children, who had been pressing their faces against windows for hours, erupted in cheers. Caretakers rushed to straighten clothes and wipe sticky faces. The director, Mrs. Varga, a stern woman with kind eyes, took a deep breath and smoothed her skirt before walking to the entrance. The heavy wooden door opened, and there he was, Michael Jackson, dressed in a simple black coat dusted with snowflakes, his face partially hidden behind dark sunglasses despite the winter gray outside. Behind him stood a single security guard carrying several large bags, and beside him, a translator. "Mr. Jackson," Mrs. Vargas said, extending her hand. "We are so honored by your visit." Michael removed his sunglasses, revealing eyes that took in everything: the worn carpet, the patched walls, the faces of children peering around corners and through doorways. He shook her hand warmly. "The honor is mine," he said softly. "Thank you for having me." As he stepped fully into the building, removing his coat to reveal a simple red sweater and black pants, the children who had been hiding rushed forward, their initial shyness overwhelmed by excitement. Michael knelt down to their level, greeting each child individually, asking names, accepting shy hugs and exuberant high-fives with equal grace. The security guard began unpacking the bags, revealing toys, not generic donations, but individually wrapped gifts with name tags. Michael had requested a list of the children in advance, with their ages and interests. Each present had been personally selected. "We have a small performance prepared," Mrs. Vargas said when the initial excitement had somewhat settled. The children had been practicing for weeks. Michael was led to the common room where a space had been cleared, the worn furniture pushed to the walls to create a makeshift stage area. He sat in a chair placed front and center, the place of honor. 23 children, ranging in age from 4 to 16, lined up with the precision of those who had rehearsed extensively. At a nod from their music teacher, they began to sing, a Hungarian folk song followed by a carefully practiced rendition of Heal the World. Their voices were untrained but earnest, filled with the particular poignancy of children who understood too well the song's message of pain and hope. Michael watched with complete attention, his expression open and engaged. When one small boy in the front row forgot his part and froze, Michael gave him an encouraging smile and began to softly sing the line, guiding him back into the song. By the final chorus, Michael had joined them fully, standing and taking the hands of the children on either side of him, creating a chain that soon encompassed everyone in the room: children, staff, security, translator, all singing together. As the last notes faded, there was a moment of perfect silence. Then applause erupted from the children, from the staff, from Michael himself. Tears glistened in more than a few eyes. What was scheduled to be a 1-hour visit stretched into 2, then 3. Michael sat on the floor, playing board games, helped serve hot chocolate in the dining hall, and listened attentively as children showed him artwork or demonstrated skills they were proud of. He seemed in no hurry to leave, genuinely engaged with each interaction. It was during this unstructured time that 8-year-old Tamas found his moment. Tamas had been at the orphanage for 3 years, since his parents died in a car accident that he survived with only a small scar above his right eyebrow. He was a quiet child, observant and thoughtful in a way that sometimes made the staff forget how young he was. He had been watching Michael intently throughout the visit, not pushing forward for attention like some of the other children, but always positioning himself nearby, listening, watching. As Michael sat at a small table helping a group of younger children with a puzzle, Tamas approached slowly. He stood silently at Michael's elbow until the superstar noticed him and turned with a warm smile. "Hello," Michael said, the translator quickly converting his greeting to Hungarian. Tamas replied in carefully practiced English, words he had been rehearsing in secret for days. "Hello, Mr. Michael. I am Tamas." Michael's smile widened at the boy's effort. "It's very nice to meet you, Tamas," he replied, speaking slowly and clearly. "Your English is excellent." The boy beamed at the compliment, but then grew serious, his small face setting in lines of determination. He glanced around, then leaned closer to Michael, as if what he had to say was for Michael's ears alone. "I know who you are," he said in his halting English. "Not just singer, not just dancer." Michael tilted his head, curious. "Oh, who am I then?" Tamas took a deep breath. "You are the man who loves children, who builds hospitals and parks, who visits sick kids." His English grew more broken as his emotion increased. "My friend Annika, she was sick, very sick. She went to your Neverland before she went to heaven. She told me it was magic, like you made a place just for kids." Michael's expression softened, a shadow of sadness passing over his features at the mention of a child who had passed away. "Neverland is for children," he said gently. "That's why I created it." Tamas nodded solemnly. "I have question," he said. "Private question." Michael glanced at the translator, who had been keeping a respectful distance but staying close enough to assist if needed. With a small gesture, he indicated that she could step back further, giving the boy the privacy he sought. Then he leaned closer to Tamas. "What is your question?" The orphanage had grown quieter, the energy of the long afternoon visit beginning to wane as some of the younger children were led away for naps. In this relative calm, Tamas gathered his courage and asked the question that had been burning in his heart since he'd heard Michael Jackson would be visiting. "Will you be my dad?" The words hung in the air between them, simple but enormous. Michael went very still. The translator, who had heard despite the distance, made a small sound of surprise. Nearby staff exchanged glances, one moving to intervene, but Mrs. Varga held up a hand, stopping them. This was a moment that needed to unfold without adult interference, no matter how well-intentioned. Michael studied the boy's face, the hopeful eyes, the slight tremble of his lower lip, the courage it had taken to ask such a question. When he finally spoke, his voice was gentle but not dismissive. "Being a father is the most important job in the world," he said. "It's not something to enter into lightly." Tamas nodded, his expression serious beyond his years. "I know," he said. "That's why I ask you. You would be good dad." Michael's eyes glistened with unexpected tears. Those close enough to see would later remark on the raw emotion that crossed his face. Not pity, but a profound recognition of the trust being placed in him. "Tamas," he said after a moment, "I am honored by your question. Truly honored." He placed a hand gently on the boy's shoulder. "I can't be your father in the way you're asking." The boy's face fell, though he tried to hide his disappointment. "But," Michael continued, "I believe that family isn't just about who shares your blood or your name. Family is about who holds space in your heart." He touched his own chest lightly. "And you, Tamas, have just claimed a space in mine." The translator conveyed these words softly, and as their meaning registered, Tamas's expression transformed. Not the uncomplicated joy of getting exactly what he'd asked for, but something more complex, the beginning of understanding that meaningful connections come in many forms. Michael reached into his pocket and removed something that caught the light, a small pin in the shape of a carousel horse, crafted from silver and enamel. "This is from Neverland," he said, placing it in the boy's palm. "It reminds me that childhood should be a time of joy and wonder. I want you to have it." Tamas stared at the pin with wide eyes, then carefully, reverently pinned it to his shirt. "Thank you." he whispered. "I will keep forever. And I have a promise for you," Michael continued. "From this day forward, you won't be alone. I may not be your father, but I will be your friend. A friend who remembers you, who thinks about you, who cares what happens to you." It could have been empty words, the kind of promise adults sometimes make to children in emotional moments, with every intention of keeping, but which inevitably fade against the demands of busy lives. But those who knew Michael Jackson, well, would not have been surprised by what happened next. If this story moves you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more moments that show the true heart of Michael Jackson, beyond the headlines and controversies. The private acts of compassion that rarely made headlines but defined who he truly was. Michael turned to Mrs. Varga, who had been maintaining a respectful distance. "Could we speak privately?" he asked. She nodded, leading him to her small office while the translator accompanied them. The conversation that took place behind that closed door would change the trajectory of not just Tamas's life, but the lives of all the children at the orphanage. Michael established a trust fund, not only for Tamas's education through university, but for improvements to the facility itself, renovations to fix the drafty windows and unreliable heating, funds for arts education, musical instruments, and a proper playground in the courtyard. But his commitment went beyond the financial. He arranged for Tamas to receive regular letters and calls, maintained through his staff even during the busiest periods of his career. 3 times a year, packages would arrive at the orphanage, on Tamas's birthday, at Christmas, and on the anniversary of their meeting. Not just for Tamas, but for every child, each gift thoughtfully selected based on updated information about their interests and needs. When Michael returned to Budapest on tour 2 years later, he arranged for all the children from the orphanage to attend his concert as VIP guests. They were brought backstage afterward, where Michael spent time with each of them, but it was Tamas he embraced first and longest. The boy was taller, his English much improved through the language lessons Michael's fund had provided, but the carousel horse pin still adorned his shirt, now accompanied by a small collection of photos he proudly displayed. Michael and Tamas together at their first meeting, Michael surrounded by all the orphanage children at the concert, and a framed letter signed with Michael's distinctive signature. As Tamas entered his teenage years, Michael's commitment never wavered. When the boy showed particular aptitude for music, Michael arranged for instruments and lessons. When Tamas expressed interest in possibly studying in America someday, Michael connected him with educational consultants who could guide his academic choices. It wasn't adoption in the legal sense, but it was a bond that transcended conventional categories. Mrs. Varga, reflecting on it years later, would say, "He didn't just change Tamas's life that day. He showed all our children that they mattered, that they were worthy of being remembered by someone the whole world wanted a piece of." That was the real gift. Tamas himself was more succinct. In a university essay that would later win him a scholarship, he wrote, "Some people have biological fathers. Some have adoptive fathers. I had a friend who taught me that family is not about legal documents or shared DNA. It's about who shows up for you again and again, even when the cameras aren't rolling and there's nothing to be gained except the joy of connection." On June 25, 2009, when news broke of Michael Jackson's death, Tamas Horvath was 21 years old, studying music education at Berkeley, his tuition and expenses still covered by the trust Michael had established 13 years earlier. He wore the carousel horse pin on the lapel of the black suit he put on that day, and would wear it at the memorial service he attended in Los Angeles, one of thousands mourning the loss of an icon. But unlike most, he mourned not just the artist who had provided the soundtrack to his childhood, but the man who had kept every promise made to a hopeful 8-year-old boy in a Budapest orphanage. After completing his education, Tamas returned to Hungary. Using the remainder of his trust fund, supplemented by donations he gathered from around the world, he established a music therapy program for orphaned and abandoned children. The program's logo was a carousel horse. Above the entrance to the building hung a sign with words taken from Michael's song, "Will you be there? Hold me like the River Jordan." Inside, the walls were adorned with images of children playing instruments, dancing, finding joy through artistic expression. And in Tamas's office, preserved in a simple frame, was a carousel horse pin, slightly tarnished now, but still catching the light in a way that transformed it from a simple object into a symbol of a promise kept. In the years following Michael's death, as controversies and questions continued to swirl around his legacy, Tamas was often approached by journalists seeking insight into the real Michael Jackson. His response was always the same: "I cannot speak to who he was for everyone. I can only tell you who he was for me. The man who taught me that family is not defined by circumstance, but created through consistent love. The man who saw a lonely child asking for a father, and, instead of offering empty words, became a lasting presence. The man who understood that sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is not what they ask for, but what they truly need." And perhaps therein lies the most powerful part of this story. Not the grand gestures or financial support, though those certainly changed lives, but the fundamental understanding Michael showed that day in Budapest. When faced with an impossible request from a child's heart, he didn't dismiss it or make promises he couldn't keep. Instead, he found the deeper need beneath the question and addressed that with authenticity and commitment. "Be my dad" was, at its core, a plea not just for a parent, but for permanence, for someone who would remember, who would remain, who would witness a life unfolding and care about its direction. And in that deeper sense, without legal documents or shared living spaces, perhaps Michael did become exactly what Tamas had asked for: a consistent, caring presence who held a space in his heart for a child who needed to be seen and remembered. In a life filled with spectacular achievements and painful scrutiny, it was these quiet connections, sustained far from the spotlight, that revealed the true measure of Michael Jackson's humanity. And in a small music therapy center in Budapest, where children who have lost everything find themselves through art and expression, that humanity continues to echo, transcending both death and controversy, touching lives that will never know the man, but will forever feel his impact through the legacy of a promise kept to a brave little boy who dared to ask for what his heart needed most.